We continue now at the top of Daf Ches Amud Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 28a. This daf is sponsored by David and Ariella Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amud or a daf, see the description box below, and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah mentioned a person who has intention either to eat the or ha'aliyah, the hide of the tail, outside of the proper place or outside of the proper time. Again, as the Mishnah said, if the intention is outside of the proper place, so then the carbon is disqualified. It's possible. If the intention is outside of the proper time, then it is pigul, and a person who eats from that carbon is chayiv kares. And the Gemara in the previous summit said that initially we think that the or ha'aliyah, the hide of the tail, is ka'aliyah dami, is the same thing as the tail itself. And Rashi explains, Ka'al Yodami, it's the same as the tail itself. V'afilu le'inyan haktorah, meaning to say, even in terms of burning it on the Mizbeach, the tail itself is burned on the Mizbeach, specifically when we're talking about a sheep, a shlamim that is a sheep. And so that's burned on the Mizbeach. And so we think that that is also true with regards to the hide of the tail. That is also burned on the Mizbeach. Uv'shalmei keves, we're talking again about carbon shlamim that are sheep. Shal yoso kareva, where the tail of the sheep is offered on the Mizbeach, so Nami or Karav, so also the hide of the tail is offered. That's what we initially think, that really the hide of the tail should be offered on the Mizbeach. And just like, as far as achila is concerned, it's considered to be meat, so too for the mitzvah of burning it, it's considered to be meat, meaning to say again, the even though it's a hide, it's considered to be part of the tail itself, and just like the tail is burned on the Mizbeach, so too the hide of the tail is burned on the Mizbeach. V'katani masnisan, and what does it say in our Mishnah? It says, Techi shachit shlamim, when he does the shchita of the carbon shlamim, and again with the intention, lechol or ha'aliyah bachutz, to eat from the hide of the tail outside of the proper place. Olamachar, or outside of the proper time, meaning tomorrow. Have a machshava, that is considered a machshava that can render disqualification or can render pigul. V'afal gav, now even though dechishev me'achilas mizbeach la'adam, really this is something that should have gone on the Mizbeach, and instead he's having an intention, not only the improper time or improper place, but also he's thinking that he's going to eat it. He's not even thinking about burning it on the Mizbeach. That is the difficulty that the Gemara here is confronting. As the Gemara now continues and asks, isn't he having intention over here, something that should have been consumed by the Mizbeach, but his intention is that it's going to be consumed by the person, that the person's going to eat, again, from the carbon, from the or ha'aliyah, with the intention of the improper place or the improper time. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, Hamoni Rabbi Eliezer he. Who's the author of our Mishnah? It's Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar Mechasher Me'achilas Mizbeach La'achilas Adam. It happens to be Rabbi Eliezer holds that you are able to have intention from something that should be consumed by the Mizbeach to being eaten by a person, and the other way around also. Ume'achilas Adam La'achilas Mizbeach, something that should be eaten by a person, you're having intention that it should be eaten or consumed by the Mizbeach. Titanan, as we learned in the Mishnah later on, Hashochet as hazevach, if one slaughters a carbon, lechol davar shein darko lechol, to eat something which normally isn't eaten, lahakter davar shein darko lahakter, or to burn something on the Mizbeach that's not normally burned on the Mizbeach, the Tanakama says kosher, it's kosher because that's not really considered an intention that can render the kind of disqualification or pigul that happens when a person has intention again for the wrong time or the wrong place. For Rabbi Eliezer posel, but Rabbi Eliezer says no, it is disqualified. That is considered to be machshava, even though it's something again shein darko lechol, and he's having a machshava about achilo, or if it's something that's ein darko lahaktir, and he's having a machshava about burning, about haktorah. So again, Rabbi Eliezer is going to say that that is considered to be a good machshava. Essentially, Shmuel is answering yes, that's exactly what's happening in our Mishnah. He's being mechashev me'achilas mizbeach la'adam, because the or ha'aliyah, the hide of the tail, is considered like the tail and really should be burned together with the tail on the mizbeach. Rashi explains Rabbi Eliezer hilakamon beparakol apsulim. This is Rabbi Eliezer shita later on. Lechol davar shein darko lechol, to eat something that normally isn't eaten. Kagone murim, like the sacrificial portions that go on the mizbeach. O chutz lizmano, chutz l'makomo. Again, he's having intention outside of the proper time or outside of the proper place. Ulahakter chutz lizmano, chutz l'makomo, or to burn something outside of the proper time, outside of the proper place. Davar shein darko lahakter, something that normally isn't burned. Kagon basar, for example, like the meat of the carbon. But the Gemara continues and asks, "B'mayu kimtak Rabbi Eliezer? How can you say that our Mishnah follows the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer? Because Ema Sefer, look at the end of our very Mishnah. It says, Zeh klal, this is the rule, Kol hashochet v'hamekabel v'hamolech v'hazorek, anybody who slaughters or receives the blood or conveys the blood or throws the blood, when it comes to the machshava of pigul, it has to be done during one of the 4 blood, so to speak, avodos. So if during that time the person has intention, lechol, davar shadarko lechol, to eat something that normally is eaten, hakter davar shadarko hakter, to burn something that's normally burned, davar shadarko lecholin. So clearly the Mishnah here is saying something that it's meant to be eaten, you have to have a machshava about eating it. She'ein darko lecholo, but if it's not something that's meant to be eaten, so then it's not going to be good if you have a machshava about eating. So clearly, ason l'rabbanan, clearly the end of the Mishnah follows the rabbanan. The end of the Mishnah is saying that the machshava has to be with what is normally done with that part of the carbon. If it's normally burned, you have to be thinking you're going to burn it outside of the proper time or outside of the proper place. If it's normally eaten, you have to be thinking the wrong intention again, that you're going to eat it outside of the proper time or outside of the proper place. Clearly, the end of the Mishnah is like the Rabbanan. Reish Rabbi Eliezer v'Sefer Rabbanan. Are we saying that the beginning of the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer and the end of the Mishnah is the Rabbanan according to Shmuel? Amar Le'in, he said, yes, that is what we're saying. The beginning of the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer. Our part of the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer. The end of this Mishnah is the Rabbanan. And Rashi explains this is going on the end of the Mishnah. Lechol davar shadarko lechol, again, to eat something that is normally eaten. Basar, that refers to meat. And shadarko lahaktir, something that is normally burned. A murin, that refers to the sacrificial portions. And the point again of the end of the Mishnah is avalim chishav lahaktir basar lamachar. If he would think to burn the meat tomorrow, the meat really is eaten, it's not burned. O lechol a murin lamachar, or to eat the a murin, which really should be burned, he's thinking to eat them tomorrow. Kosher, then it's kosher. Shein mechasher me'achilas adam lemizbech, because there is no machshava. We don't count the intention when it's something that's achilas adam to mizbeach, or the other way around. Or me'achilas mizbeach la adam, or from the achilas mizbeach to a person. And the Gemara continues with a second approach to our Mishnah. Rav Huna Amar, Rav Huna says, or alya, lav ka'alya dami. The hide of the tail actually is not like the tail, even though the tail is burned on the Mizbeach, but the hide does not have the same status as the tail itself. The hide of the tail doesn't have the same status as the tail itself, and the hide of the tail actually is eaten. That's why our Mishnah is talking about eating the hide of the tail, and again, having the wrong intention. Amar Rava says, my time with Rav Huna, what's the reason of Rav Huna? How do we know that the hide of the tail is not like the tail? Because when it talks about burning the tail on the Mizbeach, it says chelbo ha'alya. It says chelbo ha'alya. Now, chelbo ha'alya could be understood as simply meaning the choicest portion of the animal. That could be the word chelbo, which is the tail. It could be referring to the whole tail. But you could also understand chelbo ha'alya, which would be the fat of the tail, and that would be an exclusion. V'lo or ha'alya, you burn on the Mizbeach the fat of the tail, but you don't burn on the Mizbeach the hide of the tail. That's Rav Huna's approach, and so therefore it makes perfect sense why our Mishnah is talking about eating the hide of the tail, because that's excluded. When the pasuk talks about burning the tail on the Mizbeach, it's only the chelbo ha'alya, the fat of the tail. It's not including the hide of the tail. Rashi explains, lav ka'alya dami, it is not like the tail itself. Le'inyan mitzvahs haktaraso, meaning in terms of the mitzvah of burning the tail, that does not include the hide of the tail. Hu demiyate krok and mefarish Rabbah, there's an exclusion in the pasuk, as Rabbah explains. The Girs of our Gemara was Omar Rava, my time at the Rav Huna, but in the Shinui Nuschos it has Rabbah. As Rabbah explains, chelbo ha'alya tamima gabe haktaras alya ksib, by the burning of the alya, the burning of the tail, it says chelbo ha'alya, again, parish behedya chelev velo or, and the idea we're explaining is that it is the chelev, the fatty part, and not the hide. And the Gemara continues with a third explanation of our Mishnah. Rav Chisda says, li olam or ha'alya ka'alya dami, really like Shmuel, the hide of the tail is the same as the tail, it has the same status. Now here in our Mishnah, what are we talking about? Again, our Mishnah talks about eating the hide of the tail instead of burning it on the Mizbeach. We're talking specifically ba'alya shel gedi. We're talking about the tail of a goat, which is not the same as a tail of a sheep. When it comes to the tail of a goat, in general that is eaten, and so the hide of the tail, which is like the tail, is eaten as well by a goat, and that's what our Mishnah is talking about according to Rav Chisda. And Rashi explains, our Mishnah, which talks about a person eating the hide of the tail, it's the tail of the goat. She'ena kreva, when it comes to a goat, the tail of the goat is not offered on the Mizbeach. Kedamar beperakama, we say this in the first parak, limeid al ha'ez, that it teaches about the goat, she'ena tu'una alya, that the tail does not need to be brought on the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues, Kulu kishmuel lo amri, the other Amoroi, meaning Rav Huna and Rav Chisda, they don't say like Shmuel, because Reish Rabbi Eliezer v'Sefer Rabbanon lo mukmi, they don't want to say that the beginning of our Mishnah follows Rabbi Eliezer and the end of our Mishnah follows the Rabbanon, which is what Shmuel said. And Rav Huna lo amri, they don't follow Rav Huna, meaning Shmuel and Rav Chisda, they don't follow Rav Huna who says or aliyah, that the height of the tail is not like the tail, because or aliyah ka aliyah dami kamash malu, it makes more sense to them to say that the height of the tail should be treated the same as the tail. But the Gemara says Rav Chisda, but Rav Chisda's approach, who says that the height of the tail is the same as the tail, and our Mishnah is talking about the height of the tail of a goat. My time alo amri, why don't they say like Rav Chisda? What's wrong with Rav Chisda's approach? And the Gemara says to that, my kamash malon, because according to Rav Chisda, what then really is the Mishnah teaching us? When the Mishnah mentions the height of the tail, what is the Mishnah trying to teach us? Or aliyah ka aliyah dami, is the whole point of the Mishnah just to teach us that the height of the tail is like the tail? But that actually, Tanina, that we already learned in a Mishnah. This Mishnah is discussing Tumah. The Mishnah says, ve'elu sha'urosein kivasaran, in the following, the hide is treated like the meat, or shatachas aliyah, the hide of the tail, or the hide under the tail, is treated like the tail itself, and so therefore we already have a Mishnah that teaches us this idea. And Rashi explains, my kamashmalon, according to Rav Chisda, what is our Mishnah teaching us? Tana de Masnisid, the Tana of our Mishnah, what's he teaching? Iba aliyah shel gedi koyif. In our Mishnah we're talking about the tail of a goat, and again the idea is that the hide of the tail is the same as the tail, and by a goat it would be eaten. Iamrid bishlama bishel keves. Now if you would have said correctly that we're talking about a sheep in our Mishnah, so then kamash malon l'shmuel, then it makes sense what Shmuel, according to Shmuel, what the Mishnah is teaching us. The mechashvin me'achilas adam lemizbeach, that the intention from something that should have been eaten by a person, instead you're having intention to the mizbeach, or the other way around, the me'achilas mizbeach la'achilas adam, it should have been eaten by the mizbeach, your intention is a person's going to eat it. So Rabbi Eliezer, that's already saying that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Eliezer. There the Mishnah is teaching us something novel according to Shmuel. Rav Huna demuki la k'Rabbanan, and according to Rav Huna who says that our Mishnah follows the Rabbanan, Ashmin on Tana Didan, so our Tana is teaching us to or aliyah lav ka aliyah dami, that the height of the tail is not like the tail itself, la'aktiro, in terms of burning it. We say no, the height of the tail is not like the tail, it is not burned, it is eaten. That would also be a chiddush in Rav Huna's approach. Elul Rav Chisda, but according to Rav Chisda, our Mishnah is simply talking about a goat, which is normally the tail is eaten and the height of the tail is the same. So lama li lemisnia, so what's the purpose of our Mishnah teaching and talking about the height of the tail? Ila ashmina de or aliyah le'inyan achilas adam ka aliyah dami, if it's just to teach us that the height of the tail in terms of a person eating it is the same as the tail itself, and therefore if you have intention to eat it tomorrow, it's the same as thinking about a kazayas of the meat that you're going to eat it tomorrow, because it's soft and it's able to be eaten, the height of the tail is able to be eaten. But if that's what the Mishnah is teaching us, so Tanina, we actually already learned that in a Mishnah b'shchitas chulin and shchitas chulin and Meseches chulin. What does it say over there? It says ve'elu shorosein kivasaran. It says in the following, by the following we say the hide is like the meat, meaning latame tumas nevelos. The context over there is tumas nevela. V'kachashav or aliyah, and it says over there that the or ha'aliyah, again the hide of the tail, is considered to be like the meat, so to speak. It's considered to be like the tail. So we already have a Mishnah that teaches this idea. Why would we need our Mishnah to teach this as well? And the Gemara continues and explains how Rav Chisda would understand the chiddush of our Mishnah. Rav Chisda will respond to this. It is necessary to teach it in our Mishnah, because Salkadai Tchamina, one might have thought Hani Mili Linyan Tumah, when it comes to the Mishnah in Chulin. So there the context is Tumah. Maybe it's only by Tumah that we say the hide of the tail is like the tail. Derachich, because it's soft, so mitztarif, so it combines in terms of the halachos of Tumah. Aval Hacha, but over here when we're talking about eating from the carbon, again we're saying that the hide of the tail is the same as the tail. The tail is eaten by the gedi, by the goat, and so too the hide of the tail is eaten. But over here, emo lemashcha, one might say that the word lemashcha, we can interpret that in the pasuk, even though the literal interpretation is to anoint, but we could say it's legedula, it means for greatness. It means kederech shamelachim ochlin. It has to be the way the kings eat. Velo avidi melachim da'achli hachi, and the kings don't eat this. The kings wouldn't eat the hide of the tail. So maybe one would say that it's different, the hide of the tail in terms of eating it. It shouldn't be treated the same as the tail itself. So Eimolo, I would say that it's not eaten. So Kamash Malon. So that's what our Mishnah is teaching, that this idea that the hide of the tail is considered like the tail is true not only by Tumah, but it's true in the context of Karbonos as well. And Rashi explains, mitzdaref letame tumas ochlin, again, the height of the tail joins together to create this tumas ochlin, bechabetza, that's tumas ochlin with the shear of an egg, o tumas nevelos bechazayis, or there could be the tum of nevela by a kazayis. Aval hacha, but over here, linyan kodshim, when it comes to kodshim, to karbonos, ksiv gabe matanos kahuna, it's written by the gifts of the kahuna, l'chol kodshe b'nei Yisrael l'chon esatim l'moshcha, it says the word l'moshcha. V'hainu l'gedula, we understand that to mean l'gedula, for greatness, k'demetargaminan l'revu, that's how the word l'moshcha is translated over there, l'revu. L'lamet shiu ochlin osan derech achilas malachim hameshuchim, and what it means is that it should be eaten the way that kings who are anointed eat. V'lo avidi malachim da'ach lior, it's not common for kings to eat the hide, a malote machshava, so then already one might think that it is not a valid machshava when a person has a machshava to eat the hide of the tail at the wrong time. Maybe that's not really the kind of item that would be eaten by kings, and so the machshava for the hide of the tail is not valid. One might have thought that, and we're saying no, that is not the case. The hide of the tail is just like the tail. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa. Hashochet es ha'ola, one who slaughters a karbonola, will note over here that specifically the Brisa is talking about a karbonola. Lahaktir kizayis me'or shetachas ha'alya chutz l'makomo pasel, v'ein bo kares chutz l'zmano pigol v'chayavan olav kares, and he does it with the intention to burn a kizayis from the hide that is underneath the tail. So we're talking here about the hide of the tail, and again he has the wrong intention. If the intention is outside of the proper place, it's pasel, but there's no kares. If the intention is outside of the proper time, so then it is pigul, and there is a liability to kares. So essentially, what we're talking about over here in the brisa is we're talking about a karbonola, and we're talking about burning a kazayas from the ore, burning a kazayas from the hide that's underneath the tail. And the brisa continues, Elazar ben Yehuda ish ivlim omer misham Rabbi Yaakov. Elazar ben Yehuda ish ivlim says in the name of Rabbi Yaakov, v'chein hayer Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda ish kfar ichus omer misham Rabbi Shimon, and likewise Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda ish kfar ichus, he says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the following, Echad or Beis HaProsos Behemadaka, whether you're talking about the hide by the Beis HaProsos, which is by the hooves of a Behemadaka, a small animal, V'echad or Harosh Shel Egel Harach, or let's say we're talking about the hide of the head of a calf, of a young calf, which is, again, that's soft. V'echad or shetachas ha'alya, or if you're talking about the hide underneath the tail, it's a soft hide. V'chol shemanu chachamim gabe tumah, and all the examples that the chachamim enumerate by tumah, where they said, as we said above, v'elu sha'urosein kivasaron, that these areas, then we say that the hide is considered like the meat. Lahavi or shel beis haboshes, that would include the hide in the area of the womb. All of those hides, chutz l'makomo pasel, again, the person has intention, chutz l'makomo, he has intention outside the proper place, it's going to be pasel, ve'ein bo kares, and no kares, and chutz l'zmano pigul, if it's outside of the proper time, his intention, then it is pigul, v'chayavan olav kares, and there is a liability to kares. And in any case, the question over here from this brisa is, Ola in avol zevach lo. The brisa seems to be saying that by a carbon ola, so then there you would burn the hide of the tail, because the whole point is that when he's shechting, when he's slaughtering the carbon ola, he has intention to burn a kazayis from the hide of the tail outside the proper place, outside the proper time. So apparently the hide of the tail by a carbon ola is burned, avol zevach lo, but by another carbon, by a different kind of carbon, we would not say that the hide of the tail is burned on the mizbeach, rather it would be eaten. So that makes sense according to Rav Huna. Hainu de katani ola. That's why it says ola. Again, Rav Huna says that the hide of the tail is not like the tail when we're talking about a sheep. The tail is burned on the mizbeach, as we said, but the hide of the tail is not burned. That's why the hide of the tail in this brisa, we're talking about burning it on the mizbeach only by a carbon ola, because by a carbon ola everything is burned on the mizbeach. But we wouldn't mention other karbonos because the hide of the tail is not like the tail. It is not burned on the mizbeach. Ela Rav Chisda, but according to Rav Chisda, where we say that the or tashatachas ha'alya, the hide of the tail, is like the tail and it is also burned on the mizbeach, my irya the tani ola. Why does it say in this brisa ola? Listen, Zevach, just say that's true by any carbon. And the Gemara says, Amar loch Rav Chisda will say to you, Iboyasem, if you want, I could say, Ba'alya shel gedi, that we're talking here about the tail of a goat. As we said, the tail of a goat, so there it actually, the tail of the goat, the tail itself is not burned on the mizbeach, and that's why the hide of the tail also would not be burned on the mizbeach. So that could be one approach to understanding the brisa. V'Iboyasem, if you want, I could say Tani Zevach. That's actually what it should say in this brisa. It shouldn't say the word Ola. Instead, you should have the word Zevach. Now, the question over here again was only only on Rav Chisda, why is there not a question on Shmuel? Shmuel agreed fundamentally with Rav Chisda. Shmuel agreed with Rav Chisda that the hide of the tail is the same as the tail, and therefore it really should be burned on the Mizbeach. So we can ask on Shmuel as well, why doesn't this brisa talk about other karbanos? And that Tosfos addressed that question. El Rav Chisda ma'irya de katani ola lisni zevach. According to Rav Chisda, why does it say ola over here? Why not zevach? Tosfos say l'Shmuel lo maksha. We don't ask this question on Shmuel. Lamali lemisni ola lisni zevach. Why say carbon ola? Instead, just say any carbon again, because according to Shmuel also the hide of the tail is the same as the tail. It should be burned on the mizbeach. But no, the Tani zevach, because had it said zevach, have a mukmina like Rabbi Eliezer. We could say, it would be possible to say that the Bryce is actually following Rabbi Eliezer, that the machshava, because Shmuel was willing to say that we're following Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah, to say that you can have a machshava from achilas mizbeach to achilas adam and vice versa. So that might be happening in this Bryce. In other words, if the Bryce over here would have talked about a regular carbon, we wouldn't necessarily know for sure whether the hide of the tail is like the tail or not, because it could be we're following Rabbi Eliezer. So that would explain why we're not asking the question in Shmuel. We're only asking the question in Rav Chisda. And again, Rav Chisda, the Gemara gives two answers. Either we're talking about the tail of the goat, or really the Bryce should in fact say zevach. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Pasal vein bo kares, a machsheves chutz lemekomo, so that's a disqualification, but there's no kares. But a machsheves chutz lezmano, that's considered pigul, and there is kares. And the Gemara says, Menohani mili, from where do we know this? Amar Shmuel says, Trei kroi ksivi, there are two psukim that are written. Maihi, what is it? Amar Rabba says, Shlishi, when it says in the pasuk Shlishi, Zehu chutz lezmano, that's a reference to outside, intention outside of the proper time. And pigul, when it says pigul, Zehu chutz lemekomo, that's a reference to intention outside of the proper place. It says the person who eats from it, echod v'lo shnayim. It means in one of the scenarios, not in both of them. Zeu chutz lizmano. That refers to the scenario of chutz lizmano. That's where we say that it's pigul and there is kares. V'lemuute chutz l'mekomo. When it comes to exclude chutz l'mekomo, that's how we learn out again that chutz lizmano, there's kares, it's pigul, and chutz l'mekomo is just a disqualification. But the Gemara asks, ve'ema, but why don't we say that when the pasuk says v'hanefesh ochelos mimenu, zeu chutz l'mekomo, maybe that's chutz l'mekomo. V'lemuute chutz l'zmano, and maybe we should exclude chutz l'zmano. How do we know which one to include and which one to exclude? And the Gemara says, Mistabra, it makes sense to say, chutz l'zmano ad, if the chutz l'zmano is better, the pasuk be, because that's what it opens with. But the Gemara says, Adrab, on the contrary, chutz l'mekomo ad, if maybe chutz l'mekomo is better. Why would that be better? The samachle, because that's closer to that word in the pasuk, and so therefore, the Gemara essentially says that Rabba's derivation is difficult. And Rashi explains, Menohani mili de machsheves chutz lezmano v'chutz l'mekomo poselas. How do we know that intention chutz lezmano and chutz l'mekomo is a disqualification? V'yonush kares ba'achila zos shachishev alav chutz lezmano, but kares is specifically by chutz lezmano. And so again, the first approach of Rabba, trei kroi ksivi, there are two psukim that are written, chad chutz lezmano, v'chad chutz l'mekomo. One pasuk is a reference to chutz lezmano, and one is a reference to chutz l'mekomo. The pasuk says shlishi. Rashi explains the full pasuk im he'achol yachel mipsar zevach hashlamim b'yom hashlishi, or mipsar zevach shlamav b'yom hashlishi. So it says shlishi umukim leitana lekamon. Now the Tana later is going to say b'mechashe b'shas avoda lechol mizivcho b'yom hashlishi hakosim medaber. This is not actually talking about eating it b'yom hashlishi. It's having intention to eat it b'yom hashlishi. You have intention to eat it chutz lezmano. So ze chutz lezmano. That's a reference to chutz lezmano. To shlishi, because the third day already, chutz lizman achilas shlomim, that's outside of the time of eating a carbon shlomim. And Rashi continues, pigul dechsiv b'seifid dekra, pigul yiyah. At the end of the pasuk it says pigul yiyah, kra yiseiru. That's extra. That's an extra part of the pasuk. L'rabos chutz l'mekomo. That comes to include chutz l'mekomo. Umistabra da machsheves chutz l'mekomo mukminula. Makes sense to say that we're talking about intention of chutz l'mekomo. V'lo machsheves shar paslos kagon lishpoch domo al haritz. But it doesn't make sense to say that it's some other intention of psul, some other intention of disqualification, like pouring the blood on the floor, or al manas la'orvo, Mishkavo b'dam apsulin, or he has intention to mix it with disqualified blood. The dami l'chutz lizmano, because chutz l'mekomo is similar to chutz lizmano. It makes sense that that's what we would be talking about. Kamarbi b'haikra, that's what we're including in this pasuk. The chutz l'mechitza dami l'chutz lizman, saying outside of the proper place, that's kind of similar to outside of the proper time. And then it says in the pasuk, mimenu mashma de lokaya avona tisa the nafkal on mine kares. Avona tisa is where we learn out kares. El achad minayu. Mimenu indicates that that's just going on one of the two scenarios. You have chutz lizmano, machsheves chutz lizmano, and machsheves chutz l'makomo, but kares is only going on one of them. The echad mashma v'lo shnayim. It sounds like it's going on one and not two. Midaloksiv ha'ocheles v'lishtok. Otherwise, it could have just said ha'ocheles and not say anything further. Lemuute mimenu miyutahu. Again, mimenu is an exclusion. And so, if it's better to say leukme kares olem, makes more sense to say that it's going on that one. And to samachle, maybe we should say it goes on the one that's closer. Dahai mimenu samach lepigol yiyah, because one could argue that the word mimenu is near the word pigol yiyah, the marbinan be chutz l'mekomo, where we include chutz l'mekomo. So in other words, you can go either way. We don't know which one to choose. On the one hand, you could say chutz l'zmano is better because that's what it opens with. On the other hand, you could say chutz l'mekomo is better because the samachle mimenu is closer to pigol yiyah, which included chutz l'mekomo, and so therefore again Rabba's derivation does not work. And the Gemara continues with another approach in Shmuel. Elo Amar Abaya, rather Abaya says, Ki Yosser Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi Amar Rav, when Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi came, he said that Rav said, Samach, that Shmuel was relying, again, Shmuel made the initial statement of Trei Kroi Ksivi. There are two psukim that are written. The Gemara said, Mahi, what are we referring to? Rabbah had the first approach, and so now we're bringing a second approach, that Samach, that Shmuel is relying Adetoni Tana on that which the following Tana taught, Kishu Omer Shlishi beParshas Kedoshim Tiyu, when it says Shlishi in Parshas Kedoshim, Shein Talmud Lomer doesn't have to say that. Sharei Kvar Nemar, because it already says in the pasuk, Vim He'achol Yachel Mibsar Zevach Hashlomim, again Shlomov Bayom Hashlishi. It already says that. So why does it say it over there? And Rashi explains, Kishu Omer Shlishi beParshas Kedoshim Tiyu, when it says Shlishi in Kedoshim Tiyu, Krozuta, this is the smaller of the two psukim we'll be discussing. Vim He'achol Yachel Bayom Hashlishi Pigol Hu Lo Yeirotza. It says if it's eaten on the third day, it's pigol. And Taneyu l'chutz l'makom, this already goes to the next amud. Deva'ochel mamish b'yom hashlishi lekalo ukma. Rashi notes, you cannot say that the pasuk is talking about actually eating it on the third day. We're always talking about a machshava, an intention. You can't say we're actually talking about eating it on the third day. Ta'ksiv lo yeratza, because the pasuk says that the carbon is not accepted. V'yamrin l'kamon, we're going to say later on, v'chiyachar shehuchshar yachzor v'yifsol, we don't retroactively say that if you eat the carbon late, which was a kosher carbon, and then retroactively is disqualified. That's impossible. So we can't be talking about actually eating the carbon late. That would not retroactively disqualify the carbon. It has to be talking with an intention during the avodah. You're thinking it's going to be in the improper time, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis.